The night was quiet, yet restless. In the modern world of relentless media headlines and viral revelations, stories don't just break. They explode, spreading like wildfire until no one can tell where the flames began. And at the heart of one such firestorm lies a name that has dominated conversations for years, a woman once heralded as a modern-day fairy tale come true, yet now surrounded by shadows darker than anyone could have imagined. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, whose very presence divided public opinion, now finds herself entangled in whispers that are louder than shouts. Whispers that connect her to Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose name alone sends shivers across the globe, and whose empire of secrets has pulled down some of the most powerful figures on Earth. This story, as shocking as it sounds, is not about glamour, nor about celebrity. It is about power, secrets, and the devastating cost of truths long buried. But let's step back for a moment. To truly grasp the gravity of what you're about to hear, you must first understand the duality of Meghan's journey. From an actress on the rise in Hollywood to the royal bride adored by millions, she carefully crafted her image as someone who transcended barriers. She spoke of humanitarian causes, women's rights, racial equality, and positioned herself as a voice for the voiceless. On the surface, it was admirable, and millions believed in her. But history has a cruel way of teaching us that light cannot exist without shadow, and even the brightest figures may conceal secrets that threaten to consume everything they have built. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Jeffrey Epstein, by contrast, built his life in shadows. His world was defined by manipulation, blackmail, and the carefully orchestrated corruption of power. He was not just another wealthy financier, but a man who wove webs that entrapped politicians, billionaires, royals, and celebrities. Every one of his properties was allegedly fitted with hidden cameras. Every visitor, whether knowing or unknowing, became part of his archive of leverage. When the Epstein scandal broke, names started floating, names that made nations hold their breath. And now, in the unlikeliest of twists, Meghan Markle's name has been thrown into the same pool. Imagine the weight of such an accusation. A duchess, a global celebrity, tied to the darkest scandal of the century. Not in passing, not in rumor, but allegedly with tangible evidence. Leaked tapes, whispered to exist, showing Meghan in intimate moments with Epstein himself. It's almost unthinkable. And yet, in the world of power and privilege, unthinkable does not mean impossible. The very reason this story has gripped the public imagination is because it forces us to confront a disturbing question. What do we really know about the people we idolize? The beginning of this narrative is not in a palace or a Hollywood studio, but in the murky circles of social climbing, where aspiring stars and wealthy elites crossed paths in pursuit of opportunity. Meghan's career in Hollywood was steady but never extraordinary. She appeared in shows, had minor roles, and long before royalty, was seeking entry into higher circles. It is here, according to insiders, that the overlap between her world and Epstein's becomes not only possible, but probable. The same parties, the same benefactors, the same invisible network that connected actors, producers, financiers, and power brokers. Epstein thrived in this environment. And Meghan, ambitious, determined, and eager to rise, was in that orbit. Skeptics will argue, how can this be true? How can someone like Meghan, now part of the most recognized royal family in the world, be linked to such a notorious figure? But pause for a moment. Think of the countless prominent men and women whose ties to Epstein were denied, dismissed, and then later confirmed. From Wall Street tycoons to politicians and royals, many believed themselves untouchable, until Epstein's downfall revealed the depth of his reach. In that sense, Meghan's alleged connection is not a stretch. It is part of a much bigger, more sinister picture. The middle of this story is where curiosity turns into unease. Reports began surfacing of evidence, tapes supposedly taken in one of Epstein's infamous residences. These tapes, according to sources, are explicit, undeniable, and damning. They suggest not just a fleeting association, but an involvement that, if confirmed, would devastate Meghan's public persona and send shockwaves across the globe. The very idea of such recordings being unearthed explains why powerful institutions may have worked tirelessly to bury them. Because if the tapes reached daylight, the fallout wouldn't just be Meghan's reputation. It would ripple across the monarchy, the media, and beyond. This is where the story transforms from scandal to cover-up. Why, you may ask, hasn't the world already seen these alleged tapes? Why haven't they surfaced fully, beyond whispers and leaks? The answer lies in the very nature of Epstein's legacy. His collection of secrets was never meant to be public. They were bargaining chips, blackmail material, the ultimate insurance policy against betrayal. Meghan's alleged appearance in those archives would mean she was one of many trapped in a cycle of silence, one of many whose past could be wielded like a weapon. And it is in this silence, in this hushed desperation to keep truth at bay, that the real power of the story lies. As the introduction comes to its end, we stand at a precipice. We are not yet revealing the conclusion, not yet stating whether the evidence is undeniable, nor whether the palace knew more than it let on. Instead, we invite the audience into the unfolding of a mystery that has the power to shake foundations. Because this is not simply about Meghan Markle. It is about how secrets are kept, how narratives are controlled, and how even the most carefully built reputations can be torn apart in the blink of an eye. So I leave you with this question as we step into the full depth of the story. If the truth about Meghan Markle's alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein were ever fully revealed, would the world forgive her? Or would it mark the final collapse of an image that was never truly hers to begin with? Not in Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, but in the shimmering, competitive streets of Hollywood. Meghan Markle's story was, at first glance, the quintessential tale of aspiration. Born to a working-class family in Los Angeles, she pursued the dream that so many in her city chased, the spotlight. Acting was her entry point, but Hollywood was not kind to everyone. Meghan landed roles, yes, but they were often fleeting. A brief appearance in a TV show, a one-scene cameo in a film, a face in the background rather than the star at center stage. And yet, there was something about her, ambition, determination, an almost unshakable belief that she was meant for more. It was this hunger that placed her in spaces where powerful figures lingered. She attended networking dinners, galas, charity events, and fashion after-parties where the rich and influential mingled. Meghan learned early that Hollywood was not just about talent, it was about access. Who you knew often mattered more than what you could do. And she was willing to play the game, to navigate rooms filled with people whose wealth and status could change a career overnight. This ambition is not in itself scandalous. Many have climbed through these same channels. But in Meghan's case, these circles overlapped dangerously with the world of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein was no Hollywood producer, but his reach extended into every arena of power, politics, finance, art, and yes, entertainment. His homes became places where elites congregated, shielded from scrutiny, indulging in luxuries most would never dream of. His parties were whispered about in corridors of power. To be invited meant you had arrived. Now picture Meghan at this stage in her life. She was not yet a duchess, not yet a household name. She was an actress in her 30s, with connections, but not stardom. For someone in her position, proximity to wealth and influence was not just appealing, it was survival. The fact that her path may have crossed Epstein's during this period is not far-fetched. Both moved in elite social spheres. Both were known to cultivate relationships that could open doors. Both understood the value of image. To understand why this overlap matters, you must see the contrast. On screen, Meghan often portrayed the polished professional, the strong woman who stood her ground. In interviews, she spoke about empowerment, equality, and compassion. But away from the cameras, there was the relentless grind of a woman who wanted more, who sought the right introductions, the right patrons, the right mentors. Ambition and morality often collide in such spaces. And where Jeffrey Epstein existed, morality was rarely the priority. Here lies the tension, the glamour, and the shadows. Meghan was entering rooms where everything glittered, but not everything was gold. Celebrities laughed alongside billionaires. Models brushed shoulders with politicians. Champagne flowed, secrets whispered, deals made with smiles that never reached the eyes. And somewhere in those circles was Epstein, watching, recording, taking note. The first whispers of Meghan being seen in Epstein's wider network are faint, almost speculative. Anonymous sources recalling her presence at certain functions, photographs showing her in the company of people later revealed to be connected to Epstein. Alone, these mean little, but stitched together, they form a troubling tapestry. Because Epstein's world was never casual. He invited, he ensnared, he recorded. Anyone who crossed into his orbit risked becoming part of his leverage. Why does this matter now, years later? Because Meghan's story did not end with Hollywood ambition. She ascended into royalty, into one of the most scrutinized families on earth. With that step came a demand for transparency, for purity of image. The British monarchy, already scarred by scandals, could not afford another association with figures like Epstein. Yet the possibility lingered that Meghan carried with her past connections that could not be erased. It is here that the seeds of unease take root. Was Meghan's rise truly a fairy tale of love and destiny? Or was it built upon navigating circles where power was currency, no matter how dark its source? The royal wedding gave the world its heroine, a biracial American actress marrying into tradition, breaking barriers, rewriting history. But behind the smiles, questions remained unanswered. Who had she known in her Hollywood years? What deals had been made? What rooms had she entered? Think of it this way. A person's public life is often a carefully curated gallery, displaying only the most flattering portraits. The private life, however, is the storage room behind the gallery, filled with unfinished sketches, failed attempts, and secrets too messy for display. Meghan's gallery was perfect: royal gowns, charitable speeches, magazine covers. But behind that polished facade, the storage room remained locked. And in that room, some whisper, lies the connection to Epstein. It is not about proving guilt or innocence outright. It is about the fragility of image in a world where nothing stays hidden forever. The glamorous parties, the whispered introductions, the ambition that pulled Meghan into higher and higher circles. All of these created overlap with figures like Epstein. And if Epstein's legacy has taught us anything, it is that those overlaps rarely remain benign. They become leverage, they become scandal, they become stories too dangerous to ignore. By the end of this first chapter, the line is clear. Meghan's rise was not just about Hollywood roles or a lucky romance with a prince. It was about the spaces she navigated, the people she encountered, and the secrets those circles carried. Secrets that now, years later, threaten to unravel the very image she has fought to control. And so we step into the next chapter of this story, where the shadows grow darker and the whispers about Epstein's web begin to sound less like rumors and more like inevitable truths. With a single truth: Jeffrey Epstein was not just a man, he was a system. To understand Meghan Markle's alleged connection to him, one must first dive into the structure of the empire he created, the invisible network of power, manipulation, and control that made him untouchable for decades. Epstein's world was not confined to the private jet he called the Lolita Express, nor the lavish New York mansion or the Caribbean island fortress. His reach extended far beyond walls and borders. He thrived in the shadows, pulling strings in politics, business, entertainment, and even royalty. He was not merely a financier. He was the architect of a web that ensnared anyone who entered, willingly or not. What made Epstein so dangerous was not only his crimes, but the way he embedded himself in elite circles. He understood that power is not always about money. It is about access, information, and control. He moved with presidents, partied with billionaires, advised scientists, and entertained celebrities. Each interaction was recorded, filed, remembered. Every friendship was leverage, every secret a bargaining chip. This is why his empire endured for so long, why so many feared him, and why even in death, his name continues to unravel lives. Now, imagine a woman like Meghan Markle, ambitious and eager, moving through the glittering maze of Hollywood and global elites. She was a small fish in a large pond, yet determined to make herself seen. Epstein's network was filled with such figures: actors, models, up-and-comers drawn to events where powerful men held court. Meghan's journey through those circles placed her within arm's reach of people connected to Epstein, directly or indirectly. These connections weren't always sinister at first glance. They were dinners, charity galas, industry mixers. Yet Epstein used those environments as traps, weaving his web in plain sight. The Epstein web was complex, but its structure was deliberate. At the center was Epstein himself, the orchestrator, with Ghislaine Maxwell as his right hand. Together, they built pipelines of influence, targeting young women while also cozying up to power brokers. Around them were layers of enablers, politicians, lawyers, celebrities, financiers, some complicit, others simply seduced by wealth and luxury. Each layer added protection. Each layer gave Epstein legitimacy. If someone questioned him, his friendships with the powerful shielded him. If someone threatened him, his archive of secrets silenced them. This is the network Meghan is now alleged to have brushed against. Consider the nature of ambition in Hollywood. An actress seeking opportunity attends a party hosted by a billionaire. She is introduced to influential men who promise connections. Perhaps she sees no harm. These gatherings are normal. Everyone is smiling. Champagne is flowing. But in Epstein's world, nothing was ever innocent. Every introduction was calculated. Every guest another name in his ledger. As this story unfolds, the question arises, did Meghan knowingly step into Epstein's circle, or was she simply another ambitious figure caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? This uncertainty is precisely what makes her alleged connection so explosive. The very idea that tapes exist linking her to Epstein suggests intent, yet Epstein was notorious for recording without consent. His estates were wired with cameras and chandeliers, clocks, even televisions. He collected footage the way others collected art. Those who thought they were enjoying a night of luxury often discovered, too late, that they had become pawns in his game. The deeper one looks, the clearer the design becomes. Epstein's web was not just about exploitation. It was about insurance. He lured the powerful into situations they could not publicly admit, then kept the evidence. Presidents, princes, and Hollywood icons, all allegedly caught in his archive. This is why Epstein seemed untouchable for so long. This is why whispers of Meghan's name in those files have struck such a chord. Because if true, it would mean she, too, became part of that insurance. This network was not static. It evolved with time. In the early 2000s, Epstein's influence spread primarily through finance and politics. By the 2010s, his parties drew celebrities, models, and influencers eager for proximity to wealth. Meghan's rise coincided with this latter period. As she transitioned from supporting roles in television to her breakout role in Suits, her access to higher-profile events increased. Charity galas, fashion shows, private dinners. These were the crossroads where Epstein's web intersected with Hollywood's ladder. The tragedy is that many who entered these spaces never imagined the dangers lurking within. The parties looked glamorous. The attendees were powerful. To an ambitious actress, the opportunity was irresistible. And yet, to Epstein, each new guest was another thread in his design. Meghan may not have seen herself as a target. She may not have realized that even casual proximity could one day be twisted into scandal. But in Epstein's world, perception mattered as much as reality. A single photograph, a single recording, a single whisper was enough to create leverage. This chapter is not about proving guilt. It is about painting the map of Epstein's empire, showing how impossible it was to enter elite society without brushing against his web. Meghan, like countless others, walked the same paths, attended the same gatherings, sought the same opportunities. The difference now is that her position as a duchess magnifies the implications a thousandfold. What might once have been dismissed as a harmless connection is now seen as a potential crack in the foundation of royalty. As we close this chapter, one truth becomes undeniable. Epstein's web was vast, deliberate, and merciless. Anyone who touched it, even at its edges, became a piece of the puzzle. And Meghan Markle, rising from actress to royal, may have found herself tangled in threads she never expected. The web does not forget. The cameras do not erase. And the past, no matter how carefully hidden, always finds a way back to the surface. The next part of this story will pull us deeper into those whispered gatherings, where names were exchanged in candlelit rooms, and where ambition met danger head-on. What was said, who was there, and how those whispers became the foundation of one of the most shocking allegations of our time. This is where the journey leads next. In the places where secrets are born, lavish parties, exclusive dinners, and hidden gatherings attended by those who move the levers of culture and power. These weren't the red carpet events covered by magazines or the staged galas where cameras flashed for charity. No, these were the private affairs, held in mansions shielded by high gates or islands where the world could not intrude. It was in these hidden spaces that whispers began to emerge, whispers of Meghan Markle's presence among circles that overlapped dangerously with Jeffrey Epstein's domain. The atmosphere of such gatherings was intoxicating. Imagine walking into a room filled with billionaires sipping wine worth more than most annual salaries, models flown in from Europe, politicians discussing deals in hushed corners, and actors vying for connections that could catapult them into stardom. It was not unusual to see names you'd only read about in headlines casually mingling, laughing as though the world outside did not exist. For someone like Meghan, climbing the precarious ladder of Hollywood, this was the arena where dreams could be brokered and futures reshaped overnight. But behind the glamour was an undercurrent of something darker. Those who had been to Epstein's parties described them as seductive traps, carefully staged to appear harmless while hiding intentions that were anything but. Women were introduced to men twice their age, opportunities dangled like bait. And everywhere, Epstein hovered, smiling, listening, cataloging. His close associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, often played hostess, ensuring introductions were made, reputations leveraged, and favors implied. To those on the outside, it was simply networking. To those who later looked back, it was the opening act of a nightmare. Reports began surfacing of Meghan appearing in similar social environments during her rise in Hollywood. Though rarely in the spotlight at these events, she was often within arm's reach of individuals directly tied to Epstein. A producer here, a financier there, names later revealed to be part of his larger circle. The connections may not have been obvious at the time, but in hindsight, they paint a troubling picture. When Epstein's name exploded into infamy years later, people began to revisit old photographs, guest lists, and anecdotes. Meghan's name began to appear in hushed conversations, linked by association, drawn into the ever-expanding web of speculation. What made these whispers powerful wasn't just Meghan's alleged presence. It was the question of intent. Was she merely another actress trying to make her way in an unforgiving industry? Or was she consciously stepping into the orbit of men whose reputations were already questionable? Those who defend her insist that she was naive, unaware of Epstein's true nature, simply mingling where her career demanded. Those who doubt her see it differently. A calculated move by a woman who knew the value of aligning herself with wealth and influence, regardless of the risks. The whispers were not limited to Hollywood. Meghan's connections extended into philanthropy, fashion, and global advocacy, arenas Epstein often used to cloak his operations. Charitable events in New York, fashion weeks in London, soirees in Paris, all places where the elite mingled under the guise of culture and goodwill. Epstein was known to move effortlessly in these same spaces, using philanthropy as both cover and lure. The idea that Meghan and Epstein could have crossed paths in these environments is not only plausible, but likely. One particularly persistent account describes a dinner where Meghan was introduced to a group of financiers by a mutual acquaintance, one of whom had direct business ties to Epstein. Another recalls her attendance at a fashion afterparty in New York where Maxwell was present, smiling and making introductions as she always did. None of these accounts prove direct involvement, but together they form a mosaic of proximity that cannot be easily dismissed. The danger of Epstein's world was that even proximity was enough. He didn't need everyone to be complicit. He only needed them to be present. His cameras, his staff, his meticulous records did the rest. For those in Meghan's position, the stakes were invisible yet immense. Every room she entered left an imprint. Every connection another thread woven into her narrative. These whispers of her presence at parties tied to Epstein may have been overlooked at the time, but once her royal marriage thrust her onto the global stage, they resurfaced with a vengeance. Critics began asking, what parts of her past had been left unspoken? What skeletons had been buried in her pursuit of fame? It is worth pausing here to reflect on how ambition operates in such spaces. Imagine being an actress struggling for recognition, finally invited to a dinner where executives, producers, and financiers are gathered. Would you say no, knowing the opportunity might never come again? Would you ask questions about who funded the event, who mingled in the corners? Most wouldn't. Ambition blinds as much as it motivates, and in Meghan's case, the cost of those decisions may now be coming due. As these whispers spread, they became fuel for speculation. The press, always eager for scandal, began circling, though careful to tread lightly given the sensitivity of Epstein's legacy and the powerful names entangled within it. Online forums erupted with theories, dissecting photographs, timelines, and guest lists. Every appearance, every connection was scrutinized. Was Meghan standing too close to someone known to have been in Epstein's orbit? Did her smile in a particular photo reveal something more? The truth may have been far simpler, but in the court of public opinion, perception often outweighs reality. What made these whispers even more haunting was Epstein's reputation for recording everything. His mansions, his island, his apartments, all rigged with hidden cameras. Every guest a potential piece of evidence, every interaction another card to be played. The mere suggestion that tapes existed of Meghan in those environments turned whispers into storms. Because if Epstein had footage of her, no matter the context, it meant she was locked into his archive of secrets. And once in that archive, escape was almost impossible. By the end of this chapter, the line between rumor and possibility begins to blur. Meghan's presence at elite gatherings was undeniable. Epstein's use of those same gatherings as hunting grounds is well documented. Whether the two worlds collided directly remains the question, but the whispers are loud enough to demand attention. Because in the world of Epstein, whispers had a way of becoming truth, and the cost of that truth was always devastating. The next chapter will peel back the curtain on the alleged recordings themselves, the hidden evidence Epstein guarded so carefully, and the shocking suggestion that Meghan was among those captured by his relentless surveillance. What do these tapes reveal, and why have they remained hidden for so long? That is where the story darkens further, with a chilling realization. Jeffrey Epstein's true weapon was not his wealth or his influence, but his obsession with surveillance. Every property he owned was more than a mansion, more than an island, more than a luxury apartment. It was a trap. Behind the polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers were hidden cameras, microphones, and recording devices carefully planted in places no guest would ever think to look. What looked like opulence was, in truth, a carefully staged set. The parties, the dinners, the so-called networking events were not just for entertainment. They were opportunities to capture the private lives of the powerful in the most compromising ways imaginable. The existence of tapes has long been confirmed by investigators, though the full scope of their contents remains locked away. What little has surfaced has already destroyed reputations and careers. And here lies the dark twist. Meghan Markle's name has now been whispered in the same breath as those tapes. The claim is not merely that she was present at Epstein-linked gatherings, but that there are recordings, hidden, explicit, damning, capturing her in intimate moments with Epstein himself. Consider for a moment what that means. A duchess, a former Hollywood actress, a woman who married into one of the most scrutinized families in the world, allegedly appearing in tapes designed to blackmail. If true, this would not be just another scandal. It would be a global earthquake, shaking not just the monarchy, but also the delicate trust the public places in its icons. The tapes, according to those who claim knowledge, were not accidental. Epstein's surveillance was meticulous. Bedrooms had cameras disguised as clocks. Living rooms had microphones hidden in lamps. Hallways carried the silent eye of recorders embedded in smoke detectors. Guests walked freely, unaware that every smile, every whisper, every betrayal of their private selves was being preserved. It was not about voyeurism. It was about control. Epstein thrived on the power of having proof, of holding the darkest secrets of the world's most powerful people in his hands. For Meghan, the allegations of her appearance on such recordings place her in a dangerous position. Was she complicit? Was she aware? Or was she, like many others, simply caught in Epstein's sinister game of entrapment? The truth may be elusive, but the suggestion alone is enough to stain a reputation forever. The danger of these tapes lies not only in their content, but in their potential to be used as weapons. A single leak, a single image, could unravel everything Meghan has built. To understand the power of these recordings, we must revisit why Epstein made them in the first place. He understood that human beings, even the most disciplined, have vulnerabilities. A politician might indulge in a moment of weakness. A businessman might reveal sensitive information under the influence of alcohol. A celebrity might behave recklessly when they believe they are in private. Epstein recorded these moments not to expose them immediately, but to stockpile them, to build a vault of insurance that guaranteed silence. Anyone who threatened him was reminded, subtly or directly, of what he held. It was this arsenal of secrets that kept him safe for so long. Now, if Meghan is indeed among those captured, it raises terrifying questions. Did Epstein ever use this against her? Did the royal family know, or at least suspect? And if so, how far did they go to suppress it? The monarchy is no stranger to scandal, but the possibility of such tapes would demand drastic measures. The royal family has historically protected its image at all costs, often sacrificing individuals to preserve the institution. If these tapes exist, one must wonder what was done to ensure they never surfaced. The whispers about the tapes emerged not long after Epstein's arrest and subsequent death. In the chaos of investigations, leaks, and conspiracy theories, Meghan's name surfaced in obscure reports, forums, and whispered accounts. Some dismissed it as speculation, a cruel attempt to drag her into Epstein's legacy. Others, however, saw it as consistent with the wider pattern. Epstein had ties to royals before, including Prince Andrew, whose own reputation was obliterated by association. Could Meghan be the next royal name linked to that archive of shame? Public reaction to even the suggestion has been explosive. The idea of Meghan, who carefully branded herself as a voice for women and a champion of victims, being tied to Epstein in such a way is almost unbearable for some to process. For her critics, it is confirmation of long-held suspicions that her image was a facade. For her supporters, it is unthinkable, a smear designed to destroy her credibility. And yet, in Epstein's world, unthinkable was often true. The existence of these alleged tapes, whether fully proven or not, places Meghan in a dangerous limbo. Denying them outright risks drawing more attention. Ignoring them allows the speculation to grow. Addressing them publicly could legitimize the claims. It is a trap with no easy escape, and perhaps that was Epstein's design all along. His recordings did not merely capture actions. They ensnared futures, ensuring that those caught would forever live in fear of exposure. But the story does not end with the existence of tapes. What matters most is why they remain hidden. If Epstein's death marked the collapse of his empire, why have these alleged recordings not yet surfaced in full? The answer lies in the cover-up, the alliances of silence forged by those who would lose everything if the vault of secrets were opened. Meghan's name, if included, would make her one among many, but her royal status ensures that her case would be the most explosive of all. By the close of this chapter, the audience is left with a haunting image, a vault of tapes, locked away, guarded by forces we cannot see. Somewhere in that vault, whispers say, lies evidence that could bring down a duchess and shake the monarchy to its core. The question is not whether the tapes exist, but when, and by whom, they will be unleashed. The next chapter takes us into the heart of the royal response, into the corridors of power where advisors and family members scrambled to contain what could be the most catastrophic scandal in modern royal history. What did they know? When did they know it? And how far were they willing to go to bury the truth? That is where the story now turns. Inside the palace walls, a place where history, tradition, and secrecy intertwine in ways most of the public never fully grasp. The British monarchy has survived for centuries not by avoiding scandal, but by mastering the art of controlling it. Affairs, betrayals, political entanglements, and even whispers of criminal behavior have all been absorbed and buried beneath a veneer of respectability. The system depends not on perfection, but on silence. When Meghan Markle entered this ancient institution, she carried with her the image of renewal, a modern duchess who symbolized progress, diversity, and change. But what happens when that image becomes a liability? As rumors about her alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein spread and whispers of hidden tapes began to surface, alarm bells would inevitably have rung within the palace. For the monarchy, reputation is survival. The House of Windsor had already been bruised by Prince Andrew's disastrous entanglement with Epstein. Andrew's downfall served as a grim reminder of just how devastating Epstein's shadow could be. The family could not afford another royal name tied to that network, especially one as high-profile as Meghan. Behind the gilded gates, crisis management is a ruthless science. Advisors are tasked with one goal: protect the crown, no matter the cost. The allegations about Meghan would have been treated with urgency. Even the smallest possibility of her name being linked to Epstein's tapes would have triggered investigations, discreet inquiries, and frantic damage control. Was it true? Could it be proven? Was there a risk of exposure? These were not just questions. They were threats to the monarchy itself. The royal family has a long history of preemptive action. When Diana revealed her unhappiness in interviews, the palace countered with its own carefully crafted narratives. When scandals surrounding Charles and Camilla erupted, an entire campaign of rehabilitation was launched to reshape public opinion. Meghan's situation, however, posed a different challenge. She was not just another member of the family. She was an outsider who had already clashed with the palace, a figure who courted global media in ways the royals could not control. If the Epstein whispers gained traction, Meghan would not be the only one damaged. The entire monarchy could be pulled into the vortex. Imagine the scenario in those quiet palace meetings. Advisors laying out dossiers of rumors, cross-referencing names, sifting through media chatter, and consulting with intelligence contacts who tracked Epstein's movements. Every possibility would have been explored. Did Meghan attend certain events? Was she photographed near individuals in Epstein's circle? Could there be recordings buried in the vault of Epstein's seized assets? The fear was not only in what existed, but in what could not be disproven. The greatest threat to the monarchy has never been scandal itself. It is the loss of control over the narrative. Meghan's alleged involvement with Epstein, true or not, could not be fully controlled once it escaped into public discourse. The internet, relentless and unforgiving, thrives on speculation. A rumor repeated often enough begins to resemble truth. For the palace, this was not just a crisis of fact, but a crisis of perception. Prince Harry's role in this moment cannot be ignored. Newly married, deeply protective of Meghan, and already at odds with palace bureaucracy, he would have faced an impossible choice. Defend Meghan at all costs and risk inflaming the story further, or remain silent and let the whispers grow unchecked. Harry had seen how the palace handled his mother's struggles, how Diana was left vulnerable and alone in the face of public scrutiny. He was determined not to let history repeat itself. But determination does not erase reality. If the palace truly believed tapes existed, Harry would have been forced into a private reckoning. Could love withstand the weight of such accusations? For King Charles, the situation would have been even more delicate. His reign was already fragile, balanced on the need to modernize the monarchy while upholding tradition. The Andrew scandal had nearly broken the family's reputation, and here was another potential catastrophe looming. To protect the crown, Charles would have had to weigh Meghan's value against the risk she posed. Was she an asset to the monarchy, a symbol of progress, or a liability whose past threatened to taint them all? The palace's likely response was layered. First, silence. Officially, they would say nothing, refusing to dignify whispers with acknowledgement. Behind the scenes, however, they would activate their network of media allies to steer the narrative. Stories painting Meghan as a victim of smears or distracting headlines about royal projects could serve as a shield. Simultaneously, quiet pressure might be applied to ensure that any incriminating evidence remained buried, whether through legal threats, financial settlements, or influence over investigators. The question that lingers is whether Meghan herself ever disclosed her potential connection to Epstein to the royal family. Did she confess, even in part, to attending gatherings linked to his circle? Did she warn Harry that her past might come back to haunt them? Or did she hope, as many do, that the shadows of youth would remain hidden? If the palace discovered these ties independently, the sense of betrayal would have been profound, not simply that Meghan had a past, but that she had concealed it from an institution that values transparency, at least internally, above all. What makes this chapter particularly compelling is the precedent. The palace has covered up affairs, silenced scandals, and rewritten history before. But the Epstein connection is unlike anything else. It is radioactive. No amount of charm, tradition, or charity work can soften the blow of being linked to his name. That is why the alarm bells within the royal family would have been deafening. They were not simply protecting Meghan's image. They were protecting the monarchy from implosion. By the close of this chapter, the audience sees the royal family not as passive observers, but as active players in a dangerous game of concealment. Meghan's alleged ties to Epstein were not just her burden. They became a problem for the institution itself, a ticking time bomb that had to be defused before it exploded. The stakes were not just reputational, they were existential. Because if the monarchy could not control this narrative, the very future of the crown would hang in the balance. The next chapter delves deeper into the human cost of this crisis, focusing on Prince Harry himself, his loyalty, his anger, and his desperation as he found himself caught between love for Meghan and duty to the crown. What does a man do when the woman he adores becomes the center of a storm that could destroy everything his family stands for? That is the question the story will now confront. With the image of a man torn in half, Prince Harry, once the golden boy of the royal family, found himself living a life far removed from the military camaraderie and brotherly loyalty he once cherished. His marriage to Meghan had already fractured his relationship with the crown, but when whispers about her alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein reached his ears, it was no longer just about a clash with tradition. It became personal, raw, and deeply tormenting. For Harry, the woman he loved, the woman he had defended against the world, was suddenly entangled in the same nightmare that had nearly destroyed his uncle, Prince Andrew. The palace could treat this as a crisis to be managed, but for Harry, it was an earthquake shaking the very foundations of trust and loyalty within his marriage. Harry's life had always been defined by loss and betrayal. From his mother's tragic death to his years of feeling sidelined as the spare, he carried scars invisible to the public eye. Meghan had become his refuge, the one person he felt truly understood him, the partner he believed would help him carve a new identity outside the suffocating grasp of the monarchy. But now, he was being forced to question whether she had been fully honest with him. Did she know Epstein? Did she attend those gatherings? Did she tell him everything about her past before they married? Each unanswered question gnawed at him, not because he wanted to doubt her, but because the stakes were unimaginably high. Inside the palace, Harry was pressured to face reality. Advisors demanded answers, family members whispered doubts, and the press sharpened their knives. Behind closed doors, he endured tense confrontations with his father and brother. William, pragmatic and cautious, would have urged restraint, warning Harry that blind loyalty could destroy them both. Charles, carrying the weight of the crown, would have pressed Harry to think of the monarchy before himself. Yet Harry, ever the rebel, could not simply abandon Meghan to the wolves. His heart told him to stand by her, even as his mind screamed with doubt. The dilemma was agonizing. On one hand, defending Meghan publicly risked inflaming the scandal, painting him as complicit in her alleged secrets. On the other hand, distancing himself even slightly would be interpreted as betrayal, the undoing of a marriage already under siege. Harry's life had become a battlefield, with Meghan on one side, the monarchy on the other, and his own conscience caught in the crossfire. What made the situation unbearable was the uncertainty of the evidence. If the tapes truly existed, if Meghan's alleged encounters with Epstein had been recorded, Harry's entire world could collapse overnight. The monarchy would survive. History had proven its resilience, but Harry himself would be ruined. His reputation as a man of honor, his credibility as a defender of Meghan, even his ability to raise his children outside the shadow of scandal, all would crumble. The risk was colossal, and yet he had no choice but to face it. In the private moments away from cameras, Harry's torment deepened. Friends close to him recall his mood swings, his bursts of anger, and his quiet despair. At times, he would rage at the palace, convinced they were conspiring to destroy Meghan. At other times, he would retreat into silence, unable to shake the possibility that some of the whispers might hold truth. The man who had once been so sure of his path now found himself paralyzed by doubt. Meghan, for her part, denied any wrongdoing, portraying herself as the victim of a smear campaign. She insisted that the palace, the media, and her enemies were colluding to silence her, to drag her down because she dared to challenge the monarchy. Harry wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But every denial left a shadow. What if she was only telling part of the truth? What if her silence on certain details was not protection but omission? The emotional toll was devastating. The public perception of Harry began to shift as well. For years, he had been admired as the prince who followed his heart, who stood up to tradition for love. But as the Epstein whispers grew louder, many began to question his judgment. Was he blind, naive, or simply manipulated? Social media buzzed with theories, late-night hosts made jokes, and tabloid covers speculated about the cracks in his marriage. For Harry, who had always despised the media's intrusion, the spectacle was unbearable. Once again, he felt like the boy chasing cameras after his mother's coffin, watched, judged, and powerless. The heart of Harry's dilemma was not just about Meghan's alleged past. It was about identity. Who was he without her? Who was he if he could not protect her? Who was he if the woman he chose over his family carried secrets that could destroy them both? The monarchy demanded loyalty to the institution. Meghan demanded loyalty to her. And Harry, trapped between the two, was forced to choose. As the chapter builds, the weight of that choice becomes clear. Harry's dilemma was not simply personal, it was symbolic. He represented the clash between love and duty, between modern independence and ancient tradition. His every move, every word, was scrutinized not just for what it revealed about him, but for what it revealed about the future of the monarchy. By the close of this chapter, the image is one of a man at breaking point. Harry, loyal yet conflicted, loving yet doubtful, furious yet broken. The crisis was no longer just about Meghan and Epstein. It was about the survival of a marriage, the trust between husband and wife, and the ability of a man to reconcile his heart with his heritage. The next chapter will bring us to the alleged moment when those whispers took on flesh, the supposed leaks of the recordings themselves. No longer speculation, no longer just whispers at parties, but tangible evidence that forced the world to confront the unthinkable. What was on those tapes? Who leaked them? And how did they alter the course of Meghan and Harry's story forever? That is where the narrative now turns. With the sound of a crack in the silence, the moment when whispers turn into something more tangible. For years, rumors about Epstein's secret archive haunted the powerful, a ghost story with devastating consequences. But now, according to sources, pieces of that archive began slipping through the cracks. Not the vague whispers of party attendees, not speculative associations, but something far more damning. Leaks of the alleged recordings themselves. This was no longer just rumor. It was the specter of proof, and Meghan Markle's name was suddenly at the center of it. The leaks did not emerge with fanfare. They appeared quietly, anonymously, in corners of the internet not always visible to the mainstream public. A shadowy forum post here, an encrypted message there, claiming access to fragments of footage from Epstein's vault. At first, many dismissed them as fabrications. Deepfakes had already polluted the digital landscape, and countless attempts had been made to smear celebrities with manufactured videos. But as investigators and journalists examined these alleged leaks, details began to line up with Epstein's known methods of surveillance. The settings looked familiar: the opulent decor of his New York townhouse, the unmistakable layout of rooms at his Caribbean estate. And more chillingly, the figures on screen resembled people long suspected of being in his orbit. Among them, one name set the internet ablaze: Meghan Markle. The idea that there could be explicit footage of Meghan with Epstein was more than scandalous. It was explosive. She was no longer just an actress or a royal. She was a global icon whose every move was dissected. The suggestion that such tapes existed struck at the very heart of her image. Supporters rushed to dismiss it as character assassination, but critics seized upon it as validation of their suspicions. The very possibility was enough to ignite a frenzy. The alleged footage was never released in full. What surfaced were descriptions, whispers, blurred stills claimed to have been extracted from recordings. Some outlets hinted at their existence, but refused to publish. Others avoided the subject entirely, fearful of lawsuits and the sheer gravity of the accusations. But in the digital age, the absence of official coverage only made the story grow. Online platforms churned out speculation, piecing together screenshots, timelines, and accounts from supposed insiders. The narrative took on a life of its own. For Meghan and Harry, this moment was catastrophic. Until now, they could treat the Epstein whispers as rumor, dismiss them as baseless attacks. But the alleged leaks changed the game. Even without full public release, the idea that tangible evidence existed placed them in an impossible position. If they denied too strongly, they risked drawing more attention. If they ignored it, they looked complicit. And if the footage ever surfaced in its entirety, no amount of denial would save them. The palace, too, would have been shaken. They had weathered storms before, but nothing of this magnitude. Advisors would have scrambled, assessing whether the footage was real, whether it could be suppressed, and how to manage the fallout. This was not a scandal that could be buried with clever PR. This was nuclear, capable of shattering reputations permanently. And because Epstein's tapes had already destroyed figures like Prince Andrew, the monarchy knew the danger was not hypothetical. They had lived it. The media frenzy grew louder. Tabloids speculated endlessly, while late-night comedians made biting jokes about Epstein's royal guest. Social media split into factions, those convinced it was all fabricated, and those certain Meghan was guilty. Hashtags trended, debates raged, and every image of Meghan was suddenly scrutinized in a new, sinister light. Supporters insisted she was a victim of the same machine that had long tried to destroy her. Detractors insisted the footage was the smoking gun they had been waiting for. But perhaps the most devastating aspect was the personal toll. Harry, already strained by doubt, now faced the possibility of undeniable proof. His loyalty was tested to its absolute limit. If the footage was fake, he had to defend Meghan with every fiber of his being. If it was real, he had to decide whether to protect her or distance himself for the sake of his children and the monarchy. The torment grew unbearable. Behind closed doors, arguments erupted. Tears, rage, and desperate pleas filled the private spaces of their home. Meghan insisted she was innocent, a victim of manipulation and lies. Harry wanted to believe her, but the specter of Epstein's archive loomed larger than love itself. What made the leaks so dangerous was not just their content, but their timing. They surfaced at a moment when Meghan and Harry were already under siege, from the media, from the palace, from their critics. The leaks poured fuel on a fire already raging. Every appearance they made in public was now shadowed by the question no one dared to ask out loud. Were they hiding something? Investigators, journalists, and conspiracy theorists alike dove into the mystery. Some claimed the tapes had been sold on the black market, passed between shadowy figures who profited off the secrets of the elite. Others suggested intelligence agencies had seized them, using them as leverage in unseen negotiations. The truth, as always with Epstein, was elusive. But the fact remained. Meghan's name was now entangled with those tapes, and the stain would not wash away. By the end of this chapter, the picture is clear. What began as whispers of association had now escalated into allegations of evidence. Meghan was no longer just rumored to have crossed paths with Epstein. She was allegedly captured in the very recordings that defined his reign of control. The world had not yet seen the full tapes, but the mere suggestion of their existence was enough to devastate reputations, fracture marriages, and send shockwaves through the monarchy. The next chapter will shift focus to the forces working tirelessly to suppress these tapes, the cover-up orchestrated by powerful institutions, the lengths to which the monarchy, media, and global elites would go to ensure the truth never reached the public. Because if the footage ever surfaced in full, the damage would not be limited to Meghan alone. It would bring down an empire. With silence, but not the silence of peace. It is the calculated silence of power, the kind that fills the air when institutions move swiftly and quietly to protect themselves. The alleged tapes linking Meghan Markle to Jeffrey Epstein had not been fully released, yet even whispers of their existence were enough to trigger a frantic campaign of damage control. To the casual observer, it may have seemed like nothing had changed. New headlines filled the tabloids, palace projects were publicized, and Meghan continued her appearances. But behind the scenes, powerful forces were working tirelessly to contain the fallout, to bury the story so deeply it would never see the light of day. Epstein's archive had always been both a weapon and a liability. Those who controlled it controlled narratives, careers, and in some cases entire governments. The moment Meghan's name surfaced in connection with that archive, the stakes rose exponentially. For the monarchy, already scarred by Prince Andrew's downfall, another royal entangled in Epstein's web was unthinkable. For global elites who had mingled at Epstein's parties, the risk of further leaks threatened to expose a network of secrets far wider than anyone dared admit. This was not simply about one woman. It was about the survival of an entire system built on influence and silence. The cover-up began with the usual tools, denial, distraction, and discrediting. Allies in the media were nudged to frame the story as conspiracy theory, a baseless smear campaign. Editors were warned that printing unverified claims could lead to legal action. Experts appeared on television, dismissing the idea of Meghan's involvement as impossible, insisting the footage must be fake. The goal was not to prove innocence. It was to cast enough doubt that the public would grow weary and move on. But behind the curtain, more aggressive measures were in motion. Lawyers representing the Sussexes and the palace worked overtime, issuing cease and desist letters to anyone hinting at the existence of tapes. Online platforms received takedown requests for posts referencing the leaks. Search results were quietly manipulated, pushing articles critical of Meghan further down the page while elevating more flattering narratives. This was reputation management at its most ruthless. Yet the most telling part of the cover-up was the silence of institutions that should have spoken. Investigators combing through Epstein's properties had publicly acknowledged the existence of his surveillance network. Yet when Meghan's name entered the discussion, there was no official statement. No confirmation, no denial, just a void. For some, this silence was proof that powerful hands were suppressing information. For others, it was a reminder that Epstein's archive was too dangerous to handle openly. Within the monarchy, the crisis reached fever pitch. Meetings were held in private chambers, advisors whispering strategies to shield the crown. King Charles, pragmatic and wary of another scandal, pushed for the story to be buried at all costs. Prince William, protective of the institution's future, was said to have urged swift action, fearing that inaction would let the narrative spiral out of control. Harry, however, was torn. While the palace sought to suppress, he wanted to protect Meghan openly, to fight back against what he saw as a smear. But every move he made risked undermining the palace's strategy. The family that had once stood together now fractured again, their unity tested by a crisis too dangerous to name publicly. Beyond the palace, global elites who had once brushed shoulders with Epstein also worked quietly to ensure the story went no further. Business moguls, politicians, and celebrities with their own vulnerabilities knew that if Meghan's alleged involvement was exposed, theirs might be next. They too had a stake in keeping the vault sealed. This was the unspoken alliance of silence, where rivals became allies and enemies became partners in the art of concealment. But cover-ups, by their nature, leave traces. Journalists began noticing patterns, publications that abruptly dropped stories, insiders who refused to go on record, sources who suddenly grew silent. Documents and photographs disappeared from archives, event guest lists were altered, and timelines shifted. The very effort to erase Meghan's alleged connection only deepened suspicion. Why go to such lengths if there was truly nothing to hide? The public, ever hungry for transparency, grew restless. Online investigators dug deeper, scouring old photos, tracking flight logs, comparing Meghan's travel history to Epstein's movements. Each new discovery, however minor, was amplified, shared, and debated endlessly. The harder the institutions tried to suppress the story, the more it spread in the undercurrents of digital culture. What they sought to bury had instead become fuel for endless speculation. The cover-up was not only external. Meghan and Harry themselves had to adjust their narrative. Meghan emphasized her humanitarian work, doubling down on her image as an advocate for women and victims. Interviews were carefully orchestrated to deflect attention, painting her as a target of racism and misogyny rather than scandal. Harry, visibly strained, continued to defend her, though his words often seemed rehearsed, his tone heavy with the weight of doubt. Their public appearances became performances in damage control, every gesture scrutinized for signs of guilt or defiance. The deeper question is why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to bury this story? Was it simply to protect Meghan, or was she just one piece of a much larger puzzle? Epstein's archive, after all, implicated dozens if not hundreds of powerful figures. If Meghan's name was tied to it, exposing her might open the floodgates for others. Perhaps the true reason for the cover-up was not her alone, but the chain reaction her exposure would unleash. By the close of this chapter, the cover-up is undeniable. The whispers of tapes did not fade. They were smothered, redirected, and buried under layers of silence. But silence is fragile. It cracks under pressure, and every attempt to suppress the story only makes the eventual eruption more violent. Meghan's alleged connection to Epstein was not destroyed. It was contained, for now, waiting like a ticking clock. The next chapter will explore the public reaction to these unfolding events, the way ordinary people responded to the growing suspicion, and how Meghan's image, once celebrated as a symbol of progress, began to fracture under the weight of scandal. Because in the end, no cover-up can fully control the one force that institutions fear the most, the voice of the people. Chapter 9 begins outside the walls of palaces and private estates, in the streets, on social media feeds, and in living rooms across the world where ordinary people debated what had become one of the most shocking allegations of recent memory. When the whispers about Meghan Markle's alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein collided with the rumors of hidden tapes, the public reaction was immediate, polarized, and fierce. It wasn't just another tabloid scandal. It became a cultural war, a battlefield where supporters and critics clashed, each convinced their interpretation was the truth. The first wave of reaction was disbelief. For Meghan's loyal supporters, the idea that she could be linked in any way to Epstein was unthinkable. They pointed to her speeches on women's rights, her charitable projects, her public stance as a voice for victims. To them, this was nothing more than an elaborate smear campaign, one more attempt by the palace, the press, or Meghan's enemies to silence a woman who dared to challenge tradition. Hashtags defending her filled Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Fans reposted clips of her speaking passionately about justice, framing her as the victim of a cruel and calculated plot. But not everyone was convinced. Meghan's critics seized on the allegations as vindication. To them, she had always been manipulative, self-serving, and obsessed with status. The Epstein connection, they argued, was proof of the lengths she would go to climb the social ladder. Online forums exploded with speculation, some users dissecting old photos, others matching her travel history with Epstein's known movements. Even those who weren't convinced of her guilt admitted unease at the silence surrounding the story. If it was all a lie, why weren't authorities or the palace issuing stronger denials? Why were so many media outlets avoiding the subject? The division was sharp. On one side, Meghan was a victim of misogyny, racism, and conspiracy. On the other, she was a deceiver whose carefully curated image was finally crumbling. And in the middle, millions of ordinary people were left asking questions they could not answer. Could it really be true? Could a duchess have been caught in Epstein's web? As the debate raged online, the real-world consequences began to unfold. Meghan's public appearances drew both cheers and jeers. At one charity event, supporters shouted messages of love, while critics held signs demanding she tell the truth. Interviews with everyday citizens revealed the split. Some refused to believe the allegations, others couldn't shake the doubt. For many, the scandal was not just about Meghan. It was about betrayal, what it meant if someone celebrated as a role model had hidden ties to one of history's most reviled predators. The media, caught in its own bind, added fuel to the fire. Some outlets published cautiously worded articles hinting at the controversy, but avoided explicit claims, fearing legal repercussions. Others leaned into speculation, crafting headlines designed to shock without crossing into direct accusations. Television talk shows debated the morality of covering such rumors. Was it fair to destroy someone's reputation over whispers? Or was it the duty of the press to investigate, no matter how powerful the names involved? Meanwhile, social media had no such restraint. Memes, edited videos, and viral threads turned the allegations into a circus of mockery and outrage. Every photograph of Meghan was scrutinized as if it carried secret meaning. Every old interview was replayed with suspicion. Some users claimed to detect guilt in her pauses. Others argued she looked defiant. Truth no longer mattered. Perception ruled, and perception was splitting her image apart. What made the public reaction especially volatile was the memory of Prince Andrew's scandal. People had seen how Epstein destroyed one royal's reputation. They had watched Andrew retreat from public life, disgraced, his title forever tarnished. Now, with Meghan's name hovering over the same abyss, comparisons were inevitable. Was this history repeating itself? And if so, what would be left of the monarchy once the dust settled? Harry's role in the public eye added another layer to the drama. Supporters pitted him, seeing him as a man trapped by loyalty, a husband defending his wife against relentless attacks. Critics, however, saw him as complicit, a fool blinded by love, unwilling to face the truth. Every time he appeared in public with Meghan, the debates reignited. Was his presence proof of her innocence, or simply the desperation of a man clinging to a collapsing narrative? Beyond the personal drama, the scandal touched deeper cultural nerves. Conversations erupted about the nature of celebrity, power, and trust. Why do we idolize people we barely know? Why do we expect perfection from those who rise to fame? And why are we so quick to believe or disbelieve scandals depending on our biases? Meghan's case became more than a story about one woman. It became a mirror reflecting society's hunger for heroes and villains, and our inability to accept that sometimes people are both. But there was also a darker undercurrent in the reaction. For victims of Epstein, the idea that Meghan could be tied to him was painful and confusing. Was she another victim, manipulated and recorded against her will? Or was she complicit, another figure who benefited from his web of exploitation? Advocacy groups debated whether to defend her or distance themselves. The uncertainty was agonizing. By the end of this chapter, one truth stands out. Meghan's public image was fractured beyond repair. No matter the reality of the tapes, no matter the strength of the denials, the damage was done. She was no longer just Meghan Markle the Duchess, or Meghan Markle the humanitarian. She had become Meghan Markle the controversy, a woman whose very name sparked division, anger, and endless debate. The next chapter will take us back behind the palace doors, showing how the royal family, already scarred and wary, moved to protect themselves as Meghan's scandal threatened to engulf them all. How did Charles, William, and the monarchy respond when public opinion turned into a storm, and what strategies did they employ to distance the crown from disaster? That is where the story now turns.